You can also, where are the figures from? All the numbers are from the government of India because there is no alternative source. And you can easily get this number by going onto the net and going to table A22. So if anyone wants to take that down, table A22 of the Government of India's Economic Survey, which is a document the finance minister places on the floor of the house, or the tables in the floor of the house, at the time of the budget session. So before the budget is presented, they present a document called Economic Survey of India, Government of India's Economic Survey. And that gives you all the tables. This is table A22. 1991, food grain per Indian, that is cereals and pulses, 510 grams per citizen. That's the average. 1991. What is it for the last year for which figure is available? 2006. What's the figure? From 510 grams, 422 grams. That's not a fall of 88 grams. That's a fall of 88 grams into 365 days into 1 billion people, which means the average poor family is consuming 100 kilograms less of food grain than it did 8 or 10 years ago. While 10 to 20% of us at one end of the spectrum are eating better than we have ever done in our history. Both realities are true. Okay? Both realities are true. That's India. The truth is the incredible disparity. Oh yes, the phenomenal consumption at one end, the phenomenal wealth concentration at one end, and then there is this. This is the country that now boasts as being the primary destination for medical tourism. Which means that middle-class Americans can fly business class, get surgeries done in India, and it's still cheaper than getting it done here. Okay? But 200 million Indians have ceased to seek medical attention of any kind because they can no longer afford it. So CEO salaries have been going up everywhere and are high. Oh, the one list on which nobody can beat us, not even the 800-pound gorilla. Forbes has a list of world's costliest weddings. You're outclassed. At the top is Mr. Lakshmi Mittal. He's poor guy. I mean, you can't blame him. I mean, he was in Paris and he was trying to get his daughter married, and at that season in Paris, it's very difficult to get a wedding hall. So he just didn't have a choice. I mean, he hired the Palace of Versailles and had the wedding there, and it cost him 60 million pounds. So it doesn't matter what currency, rubles or what, it just looks seen anyway. Now the country that has these guys also ranks, not only do we rank 128 in the Human Development Index, which means we are in the bottom 50 nations of the world, okay? But within those bottom 50, we are down there at the worst when it comes to child malnourishment. When it comes to child nutrition, we are worse than Ethiopia, we are worse than Burkina Faso, we are worse than Sierra Leone, we are worse than Guinea-Bissau, who are 169 to 175 in that index. Percentage of India children, underweight under the age of 5. Here you are. Guinea-Bissau, 25%. Burkina Faso, 35%. Sierra Leone, 38%. Ethiopia, 38%. India, 47%. This is for children below 5. And within that 47%, you will find a disproportionate number of girl children. Okay? They get much less to eat than the boy does. So, now, okay, we know that there's been this inequality. We know there has been this inequality. We know that inequality has been there before in India. So what's so special or new about this inequality? How is it different from, there is a major difference. The major difference is this, that never before was the inequality so cynically constructed, so ruthlessly engineered by design, with planning, with the idea that this is how it's going to change. You're all familiar with the trickle-down theory. I got so much food on my table, some of it has got to fall off and you get to eat. So, yeah, in this period, when you have inequality growing, much of the principles which I'm talking about are pretty similar to what happened in the United States at a different level, in a different standard of living. Agriculture always takes the worst hit. It's anyway an underprivileged sector. I'm not talking about corporate agriculture. I'm talking about agriculture as practiced by human beings. Agriculture is anyway a highly disadvantaged sector. Its average wages are much lower than elsewhere. Its average income is much lower than elsewhere per family. Between 91 and 2001, the two censuses of India in that period, 8 million people quit farming. And we do not have a study which tells us where they went. We're talking about 8 million human beings who quit farming. We know that by looking at the number of cultivators in the two censuses, which has fallen from 111 million to 100 million. Did they go and find jobs in industry? Oh no. Maybe they went to Mr. Tata, remember? He's the guy who owns Taj Hotel in Bombay, who thinks his people did a wonderful job of security. Yeah. Now Mr. Tata is also the owner of one of the biggest steel plants, the Jamshedpur steel plant of the Tata. So maybe all these 8 million farmers went there and got jobs, not really. In 1991, the Tatas used to produce 1 million tons of steel with 85,000 workers. By 2005, they were producing 5 million tons of steel with half that number of workers. Or maybe they went to Bajaj, Pune, the biggest manufacturer of two-wheelers in the world at one stage. Not really, because Bajaj used to produce 1 million scooters a year with 24,000 workers. Now they have 10,000 workers, but they produce 2.5 million scooters a year. So, and now they're all heavily into layoffs further. So where did these people go? Where did they go? It's your answers that are as good as mine. And the NCUS report itself tells us that the change in formal employment was either nil or marginally negative. Those are its words. All over the world, a set of processes have taken place which really plunged the Indian agrarian sector, already in internal crisis, down the tube. What were these sectors? What were these policy packages all over the world? You can see them unfolding even today in the United States. First, withdrawal of the state from sectors that matter to poor people. I maintain that the state has not withered away and it's not less interventionist. I say that the nation state in 2007, 2008 is more interventionist than it has ever been on behalf of the rich. You know, according to the United Nations, if you have $60 to $80 billion additional spending each year, you can solve the basic problems of illiteracy, health, sanitation, literacy, housing. These basic problems you can solve by spending But governments have always told us, there's no money. Man, when Wall Street crashes, they can put up $1.5 trillion. There's money. The UK finds money. Germany finds money. You've got $1.5 trillion raised in a couple of weeks when it affects the soups. Otherwise, you don't have money. $60 to $80 billion. We've been talking that number. It's attached to the Millennium Development Goals also. You can see the number, $60 to $80 billion. There's no money. Second process, huge expenditure cuts. I just flew in from California, where they're having a round-the-clock session of the legislature to decide on what to cut, because they've got to cut, because they've got a budget deficit of $11 billion. That's what you spend on 1 week on your wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's 1 week's worth of war. Okay? It's going to lead to huge cuts in California's services for its ordinary citizens. And California is not only the biggest state in the United States, it would be in the top 10 economies of the world if it were treated as an economy. I mean, maybe in the top 12 or 15 economies in the world if treated as a separate nation.